Section 17 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 4. Translated by Jonathan Scott. Section 17, Story of the Three Sharpers and the Sultan. Story of the First Lunatic. I was a merchant and had a warehouse in which were Indian goods of all sorts and of the highest value, and I bought and sold to great advantage. One day I was sitting in my warehouse, according to custom, busy in buying and selling. An old woman came in, telling her beads, and greeted me. I returned her salute, when she sat down and said, "Sir, have you any choice Indian clothes?" "Yes, my mistress," replied I, "of all sorts that you can possibly wish for." "Bring them," said she. I showed her a piece of great value, with which she was highly pleased, and inquired the price. 500 dinars, replied I. She took out her purse, paid me the money, and went away with the cloth, upon which I had a profit of 150 dinars. She returned the next day, bought another piece, paid for it, and in short did the same thing for 15 days successively, paying me regularly for each purchase. On the 16th day she came to my shop as usual, chose the cloth, and was going to pay me, but missed her purse. Upon which she said, "Sir, I have unfortunately left my purse at home." "Mistress," replied I, "it is of no consequence. Take this cloth, and if you return, well, if not, you are welcome to this trifle." She would not take it. I pressed her, but in vain. Much friendly argument passed between us, till at length she said, "Sir, you contradict, and I contradict. But we shall never agree unless you will favor me by accompanying me to my house to receive the value of your goods. So lock up your warehouse, lest anything should be lost in your absence." Accordingly, I fastened my doors, and accompanied her. We walked on conversing, till we came near her house, when she pulled out a handkerchief from her girdle, and said, "My desire is to cover this over thy eyes." "On what account?" replied I. "Because," said she, "in our way are several houses, the gates of which are open, and the women are sitting in their balconies, so that possibly thy eyes may glance upon some of them, and thy heart be distracted with love. For in this part are many beautiful damsels, who would fascinate even a religious, and therefore I am alarmed for thy peace." Upon this I said to myself, "This old woman advises me properly," and I consented to her demand. When she bound the handkerchief over my eyes, and we proceeded until we arrived at her house, she knocked at the door, which was opened by a damsel, and we entered. The old lady then took the handkerchief from my eyes, when I looked around me and perceived that I was in a mansion having several quadrangles, highly ornamented, and resembling the palaces of the Sultan. The old lady now desired me to retire into a room, which I did, and there beheld heaped together all the pieces of cloth which she had purchased for me, at which I was surprised, but still more so when two damsels, beautiful as the pleasant moons, approached, and having divided a piece of cloth into halves, each took one, and wrapped it round her hand. Then they sprinkled the floor with rose water and other scents, wiping it with the cloth, and rubbing it till it became bright as silver, after which they withdrew into an adjoining room, and brought out at least 50 stools, which they set down, and placed all over rich covering with cushions of tissue. Then they fetched a large stool of gold, and having put upon it a carpet of cushions and gold brocade, retired. Not long after this there descended from the staircase by 2 and 2 as many damsels in number as the stools, upon each of which one sat down. At last descended a lady attended by 10 damsels, who placed herself upon the larger stool. When I beheld her, my lord, my senses forsook me. I was in raptures of her beauty, her stature, her elegance, as she chattered and laughed with her companions. At length she exclaimed, "My dear mother!" when the old woman entered, to whom she said, "Hast thou brought the young man?" She replied, "Yes, my daughter, he is ready to attend thee." Upon which the lady said, "Introduce him to me." When I heard this I was alarmed, and said to myself, "There is no refugee but in the highmost God. Doubtless she has discovered my being here, and will command me to put to death." The old woman came to me, and leading me by the hand, took me before the lady seated upon the golden stool, who, on seeing me, smiled, made a graceful salute, and waved her hand for a seat to be brought, which was done, and placed close to her own. She then commanded me to sit down, which I did with much confusion. When I was seated, the lady began to chat and joke with me, saying, "What think of you, my appearance and my beauty?" Do you judge me worthy of your affection? Shall I be your partner, and you mine? When I heard these words, I replied, How, dear lady, dare I presume, who am not worthy to be your servant, to arrive at such an honor? Upon this she said, Young man, my words have no evasion in them. Be not discouraged or fearful of returning me an answer, for my heart is devoted to thy love. I now perceived, my lord, that the lady was anxious to marry me, but could not conceive on what account, or who could have given her intelligence concerning me. She continued to show me many pleasing attentions, that at length I was emboldened to say, Lady, if your words to me are insincere, according to the proverb, no time is favorable as the present. There cannot, said she, be a more fortunate day than this for our union. Upon this I replied, My dear lady, how can I allot for your proper dowry? The value of the cloth you entrusted the old lady who is my mother, answered she, is sufficient. That cannot be enough, rejoined I. Nothing more shall be added, exclaimed the lady. My intention is this instant to send for the Kazi and witnesses. I will choose a trustee, that they may unite us without delay. We will celebrate our nuptials this very evening, but upon one condition. What is that? Replied I. She answered, that you bind yourself not to address or hold conversation with any woman but myself. My lord, I was eager to be in possession of such a beautiful woman, and therefore said to her, I agree, and will never contradict thee either by my words or by actions. She then sent for the Kazi and witnesses, appointed a trustee, after which we were married. After the ceremony, she ordered coffee and sorbet, gave money to the Kazi, a dress of honor to her trustee, and we departed. I was lost in astonishment, and said to myself, Do I dream or am I awake? She now commanded her damsels to empty the warm bath, fill it afresh, and prepare cloths and necessities for bathing. When they had done as she desired, she ordered the eunuchs in waiting to conduct me to the human, and gave them a rich dress. They led me into an elegant apartment, difficult for speech to describe. They spread many-colored carpets, upon which I sat down and undressed, after which I entered the human, and perceived delightful odors from sandalwood, of cornmeal, and other sweets diffusing from every part. Here they seated me, covered me with perfumed soaps, and rubbed me till my body became bright as silver, when they brought the basins, and I washed with warm water, after which they gave me rose water, and I poured it all over me. They next brought in sweet-smelling salves, which I rubbed all over me, and then prepared to the eunuch, where I found a royal dress, in which the eunuchs arrayed me, and after perfuming me with incense of sandalwood, brought in confections, coffee, and sorbets of various sorts, with which I refreshed myself. I then left the bath with my attendants, who showed me into the grand hall of the palace, which was spread with most magnificent carpets, stools, and cushions. Here the lady met me, attired in a new habit, more sumptuous than I had ever seen her in before. When I beheld my bride, she appeared to me, from the richness of her ornaments, like a concealed treasure from which the talisman had been removed. She sat down by me, and smiled so fascinating upon me, I could no longer contain my rapture. In a short time she retired, but soon returned again in a dress richer than her last. I again embraced her, and in short, my lord, we remained together for 10 days in the height of happiness and enjoyment. At the end of this period, I recollected my mother, and said to my wife, It is so long since I have been absent from home, and since my mother has not seen me, that I am certain she must be anxious concerning me. Will you permit me to visit her and look after my warehouse? There can be no impediment, replied she. You may visit your mother daily, and employ yourself in your warehouse, but the old woman must conduct you and bring you back, to which I assented. The old lady then came in, tightened a handkerchief over my eyes, conducted me to the spot where she had first blindfolded me, and said, You shall return here about the time of the evening prayer, and will find me waiting. I left her, and repaired to my mother, whom I found in great affliction at my absence, weeping bitterly. Upon seeing me, she ran and embraced me with tears of joy. I said, Weep not, my dear mother, for my absence has been owing to the highest of good fortune. I then informed her of my lucky adventure, when she exclaimed, May Allah protect thee, my son, but visit me at least every 2 days, that my affection for thee may be gratified. I then went to my warehouse, and employed myself as usual till evening, when I returned to the place anointed, where I found the old lady, who blindfolded me as before, and conducted me to the palace of my wife, who received me with fondness. For 3 months I continued to go in this manner, but I could not help wishing to know whom I married, and wondering at the affluence, splendor, and attendance that appeared around her. At length I found an opportunity of being in private with one of her black slaves, and questioned her concerning her mistress. "My lord," replied she, "the history of my mistress is wonderful, but I dare not relate to it, lest she should put me to death." Upon this I assured her that if she would inform me, no one should know it but myself, and I took an oath of secrecy, when she began as follows. "My mistress one day went to a public bath, intending to amuse herself, for which purpose she made such preparations of delicacies and rarities, as were worth a camel's load of treasure, and when she left the hammam, made an excursion to a garden, where a splendid collation was laid out. Here she continued enjoying herself till evening, when she ordered her routine to make ready for departure, and the fragments of the entertainment to be distributed among the poor. On her return she passed through the street in which was your warehouse. It was upon a Friday, when you were sitting in conversation with a friend, arrayed in your best attire. She beheld you. Her heart was stricken with love, but no one perceived her emotion. However, she had no sooner reached her palace than she became low and melancholy, and her appetite failed her. At length she took to her bed. Her color left her, sleep forsake her, and she became very weak. Upon this her mother went out to a physician, that he may consider what might be the cause of her daughter's indisposition. But on the way she met a skilful old lady, with whom she returned home. The old lady, on feeling the pulse of her patient, and after asking several questions, could perceive in her no bodily ailment or pain, upon which she judged she was in love, did not venture to speak to her before her mother of her suspicions. She took leave, and said, "By God's blessing thou wilt soon recover. I will return tomorrow, and bring with me an infallible medicine." She then took her mother aside, and said, "My good lady, be not angry at what I shall remark, but thy daughter has no bodily disorder. She is in love, and there can be no cure for her by a union with her beloved." The mother, on the departure of the old lady, repaired to her daughter, and with much difficulty, after 20 days of denial, for my mistress' modesty was hurt, obtained from her a description of your person, and the street in which you lived, upon which she behaved to you in the manner you are well acquainted with, brought you here, and you know what followed. Such is her story, concluded the black slave. "Which you must not reveal." "I will not," replied I. And after this I continued to live very happily with my wife, going daily to see my mother, to attend in my warehouse, and return in the evening, conducted as usual by the old lady, my mother-in-law. One day, after the expiration of some months, I was sitting in my warehouse. A damsel came into the street with the image of a cock composed in jewelry. It was set with pearls, diamonds, and other precious stones, and she offered it to the merchants for sale. When they began bidding for it at 500 deniers, and went to 950, all which I observed in silence, it did not interfere by speaking or bidding. At length the damsel came up to me and said, "My lord, all merchants have increased in bidding for my precious toy, but you have neither bidden nor taken any notice of me." "I have no occasion for it," replied I. "Nay," exclaimed she, "but you must bid something more." "Since I must," I answered, "I will give you 50 deniers more, which will be just 1,000. She accepted my price, and I went into my warehouse to fetch the money to pay her, saying to myself, I will present this to a curiosity as my wife, as it may please her. When I was going to pay the money, the damsel would not take it, but said, "My lord, I have a request to make, which is, that I may snatch one kiss from your cheek as the price of my jewelry, for I want nothing else." Upon this, I thought to myself, a single kiss of my cheek is an easy price for the value of 1,000 deniers, and consented, when she came up to me and gave me a kiss, but at the same time the most severe bite, left a piece of jewelry, and went away with the greatest haste. In the evening I repaired to the house of my wife, and found the old lady awaiting as usual at the accustomed spot. She tied the handkerchief over my eyes, and she had conducted me home, took it off. I found my wife sitting upon her golden stool, but dressed in scarlet and with an angry countenance, upon which I said to myself, God grant all may be well. I approached her, took out the toy set with diamonds and rubies, thinking that on sight of it her ill humor would vanish, and said, "My mistress, accept this, for it is curious, and I purchased it for thee." She took it in her hand and examined it on all sides, after which she exclaimed, "Dost thou really purchase this on my account?" "By heavens," replied I bought it for thy sake, for 1,000 deniers." Upon this she frowned angrily at me, and exclaimed, "What means that wound upon thy cheek?" I was overwhelmed with confusion. While I was in this state, she called out to her attendants, who immediately descended the staircase, carrying the headless corpse of a young girl, the head placed upon the middle of the body. I looked, and knew it to be the head of the damsel who had sold me the piece of jewelry for a kiss and had bitten my cheek. My wife now exclaimed, "I have no occasion for such babbles, for I have many of them. But I wish to know if thou went so faithful to thy agreement with me as to not address another woman than myself, and sent the girl to try thee. Since thy promise has been broken, begone and return no more." When my wife had finished her speech, the old woman took me by the hand, tied the handkerchief over my eyes, and conducted me to the usual spot, when she said, "Begone!" and disappeared. I was so overcome by the sad adventure and the loss of my wife that I ran through the streets like one frantic, crying, "Ah, what beauty, what grace, what elegance does she possess!" Upon which the people, supposing me distracted, conducted me to this hospital, and bound me in fetters, as you see. When the Sultan had heard the young man's story, when he, much affected, inclined his head for some instants in deep thought, and then said this to his vizier, "By Allah, who has entrusted me with sovereignty, if thou dost not discover the lady who married this young man, thy head shall be forfeited." The vizier was alarmed, but recovering himself, replied, "Allow me 3 days to search," to which the Sultan consented. The vizier then took with him the young man, and for 2 days was at loss on how to find the house. At length he inquired if he should know the spot where the handkerchief was tied over his eyes, and the gateway at which it was taken off, of which the youth professed to be certain. He conducted the minister to the street where he was blindfolded, and they reached a gateway, at which the vizier knocked. It was opened by the domestics, who, knowing the vizier, and seeing the young man with him, were alarmed, and ran to communicate the quality of the visitants to her mistress. She desired to know the commands of the vizier, who informed her that it was the Sultan's pleasure that she should be reconciled with her husband, to which she replied, "Since the Sultan hath commanded, my duty is obedience." The young man was reunited with his wife, who was the daughter of the former Sultan of Cairo. Such were the adventures of the young man who was reading in the hospital. We now recite those of the youth who was listening to him. Upon the Sultan's inquiring his story, he begins as follows. End of section 17.